Good afternoon, once again, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of The Law and You. I am your host, yours truly, attorney at law Shellon Washington, licensed in the state of New York. I'm also licensed in my home country, Guyana. For those of you who are from Guyana, and I'm also licensed in the country of Trinidad and Tobago. So, thank you again for joining me this Saturday afternoon for the law and you. Today, we're going to be discussing a very interesting topic. And I know this topic affects a lot of people. A lot of people are experiencing issues relating to this type of divorce that I'm going to be discussing this afternoon. So I would like you guys to tune in, and let's discuss the topic of no fault divorces in the state of New York. No fault divorces, as it relates to any no fault state, if it's a no fault state, it's self explanatory. So if you ask yourself, what exactly is a no fault divorce? And several states now have no fault divorce, including New Jersey. And all it means is that anyone who have the residency requirement in any of those states can now obtain a no fault divorce from their spouse, meaning that the law does not concern itself of whether or not your spouse is at fault, you're at fault, or anyone is at fault. The law does not concern itself with that. You are entitled to a divorce regardless of what ground. Prior to most states implementing no fault divorces, the grounds that had to be followed, and most people had to sought a divorce based on cruelty, desertion, adultery, abandonment. These are some of the grounds people use prior to a lot of states implementing no fault divorce law. And I'm excited to discuss this topic today because I know I've spoken to so many clients and so many people who are going through a situation where they need a no fault divorce, or they're in the process of getting a no fault divorce, but they're scared or they're intimidated, they're concerned, they have questions. And guys, if you got questions about whether or not you'll be entitled to a no fault divorce, I put the number right there on the screen next to my name. You just dial that number 718-877-3100, and I'll be willing to provide you with all the information you need relating to how you can obtain a no fault divorce if you're living in the state of New York. So let's get into it this afternoon. Now, one of the reasons why I am compelled to discuss this topic this afternoon, I remember once there was a client that I consulted with, and the person wanted a divorce. The husband was unfaithful. He was engaged in extramarital activities that was affecting the relationship. And I discussed it with the client, and I told her, the client, by the way, was Christian. So they didn't believe in divorces. And we discussed it, and I told her, like, listen, you can get a no fault divorce and you can move on with your life. You don't have to. The client, in the meantime, while I was telling her, like, you can get this no fault divorce, and the law does not concern itself as to whether or not your spouse was committing adultery, your spouse abandoned you, your spouse was cruel to you, or there was domestic violence involved, abuse. The law does not concern itself with that when we're speaking about no fault divorce specifically. And the person was trying to convince me, oh, he's a bad person. He cheated on her. She got a lot of things that happened during the marriage. And this woman genuinely seemed like she had like a battered woman syndrome. She was really, really hurt about the entire situation. And I was trying to convince her, like, you should look past this and move forward with this divorce. She allowed me to start the process. Believe you guys, I started the process. I filed the paperwork. And in the end, once I served the documents on the husband, the client withdrew. The client came back and said, well, the husband spoke with her, and they decided that they will not pursue that divorce anymore. And they were saying that it was a financial situation, whereas they had property together, they had built a life together, And the people in the church, in addition to the husband, was encouraging her not to pursue it, but to just abandon the divorce and let them go back together. And I know this is something that affects a lot of people. Believe it or not, a lot of people are contemplating divorce, but a lot of times they're intimidated, they're fearful, they're concerned as to what the future will bring for them, whether or not they will end up alone, whether or not they're going to lose the financial support of a spouse. These are all questions, valid questions that people have in their minds every time they think about divorcing. But guys, let me put your minds at ease today. If you're thinking about it, if you're contemplating it, if you're unsure about it, pick that phone up and give my office a call at 718-877-3100. Now, let me explain to you. If you're thinking about divorce, chances are your spouse is also thinking about the inevitable happening, especially if it's a spouse that is very unfaithful. There's a lot of infidelity involved in the relationship. Do not waste your time trying to fix something that is dead. I know people convince themselves just based on religious beliefs that trying to bury an issue that actually exists and is plaguing your household will solve the problem. But it doesn't. It temporarily, or you take a band-aid and you put it over a wound, and the wound, no one can see it, and you don't think about it for a while. But eventually the band-aid is going to come off. And when it comes off, you ask yourself at that point, was it worth it? So if you're contemplating because you recognize there's trouble in paradise, there's problems in that marriage, chances are don't wait. And there's a couple of reasons why I'm telling you not to wait. Number one is your asset protection. If you're 2-3 years into a marriage and you're considering divorcing because your spouse is unfaithful, your spouse is committing adultery, your spouse is abusive, the person has committed numerous acts of abuse against you, either verbally, physically, or psychologically, or your spouse is just disagreeable, and it doesn't seem like there's any hope that you guys are going to ever be able to work your relationship out and to be at peace in your household. Do not hesitate and wait. Don't allow people to steal your joy, because you're going to sit in a miserable relationship for many, many years. And then when you see other people who are happy going along life, you're going to regret and you're going to be envious of somebody who's having a better relationship than you. So rather than sitting in misery because of a financial reason, won't you just get up, pick the phone up, give me a call at 718-877-3100, because there's no amount of prayers that the church can tell you to do that will fix a bad marriage. It has to be two willing people who are happy and contented with each other, that whenever they have a problem, they know that they can sit together with each other and work through those problems, and they're willing to compromise with each other. Unless you have two such willing, nice individuals, you can forget it and just call my office and let's make the arrangements to get you your freedom. Do not hesitate. A lot of people want their freedom, but they lack one essential thing, which is courage. And courage is the beginning of your happiness, of your freedom. Without courage, you will never get your freedom and you will never be able to be happy. So if you're in a situation that you need help, you need legal advice, you need to sort out your problem, call my office and have it sorted out. Do not just sit in a situation where you're in an unhealthy marriage and there's no help inside, there's no end of it inside, and you don't think that you'll ever be able to solve your problems at home. Now, like I said before, financial reasons is one of the main problems why people sit in a messy situations. Now, if you are married with children, there's a couple of ways that you can solve financial problems, which are very simple. But people surprisingly are not aware of most of these simple methods to strengthen your finances and to save you financially from going through ruins if you have to divorce. Number one, if you know that you married to Miss Wrong or Miss Mr. or Miss Wrong, Mr. or Mrs. Wrong, whichever one. If you know you're married to one of those people, start taking steps to correct your error. Number one, you can have that spouse sign a post marital agreement, a post nuptial agreement. So you can speak to them and you could say, well, listen, I love you, but I don't feel like we are working this out together in a good way. Is it possible that we should work out an agreement together where we discuss our financial situation and we determine what you get and what I get in the event of a divorce? Now, before a conflict arises, that is the best time to work out a financial agreement with your spouse that you want to be your soon to be ex. That's the best time to work out a financial arrangement when there's peace between you. If there's no peace between you, you can forget it because it's going to be in court being litigated at an expensive cost. And I'm telling you guys, in order to avoid that expensive legal tab, it's always better to sit and reason. Once you reason with your spouse, the next thing you can do is consult an attorney and have the attorney draft a postnuptial agreement for you. If that's not possible, the second phase is you can do a separation agreement. The two of you could decide, well, we're never going to try to work our lives out again. We have assets, but I don't think I want to continue to live with this person because this is pure misery. I would like to leave. Or in some cases, people leave their house because they think the grass is greener on the other side of the pasture. And I mean, that's a legitimate reason for some people. For some people, there's romantic situation that is more appealing to them, that they are willing to give up everything for romance. And that's to each his own. I would not tell a person whether or not it's right, or I wouldn't tell you what my opinion on the topic is. But if a person chooses to leave their home because of there's a more appealing person that they think they can love better somewhere else, then you guys work out what is called a separation agreement. Again, a separation agreement should always be worked out while there's still some amount of friendship between the parties. Do not wait until there is distance and the parties are not speaking, they're not on terms. That's the worst time to try to work out a separation agreement. You want to ideally get it in the beginning versus the end. You want to have a conversation with that person. You want to say, hey, listen, I don't think we're going to ever get back together again. Let's work out an agreement. I have a retirement account. You have one. We have a home together, or we have multiple properties together. Let's decide what will happen. If there's children, obviously the goal of both parents is to protect those assets, that it will pass down to the next generation. And one of the best ways to do that is by creating a trust for the assets. Even if one spouse would like to give the assets over to one spouse, you still need to ensure that those assets are protected for your children. And a lot of times in divorces, one spouse is more financially secure than the other. In a limited amount of cases, both spouses are quite financially support. They could support themselves. They don't need assistance from anyone. And in that case, both parties could afford to split the asset 50-50 and go their separate ways. But in the case where one spouse is much more financially stable than the other spouse, the best option there is the spouse who's more secure might want to take over the asset from the other spouse. So I've had situations where the parties live together in a property, the property has equity in it, and the husband or the wife decide, like, listen, I will buy out your interest in the property. And the spouse who is more financially secure pays to buy the interest. They have the property evaluated and pays the spouse who is leaving the home to buy out their interest, and the spouse who leaves the home gets that money to go and start their lives somewhere else. Or the alternative to that is they sell the home, split the equity, and both parties part their way in peace. But there's cases where that is not possible. For instance, if the parties have children, you will not be able to do that. They will have to work out something makes more common sense for the one spouse, most likely the wife, to stay in the home with the children in the property and to keep the property, or the husband to stay in the home with the children and to continue to make the payments on the mortgage or whatever. I've seen that happen in several situations where the husband, he just left and give the property to the wife, and the wife takes over the payment because the wife can afford to do that because she's getting child support also or something else, or our income is adequately able to sustain the property and receive the child support from the husband. And these are all things that you can put into a separation agreement and you can move on. And in that case, if there's like a property, there's pension, the parties could decide, okay, if the husband or the wife keeps the property, the spouse who is leaving, the party who keeps the house waives their right to that party's retirement accounts, pension, 401k, deferred compensation, whatever it is. But the party who stays on the property can actually waive their rights to the spouse's retirement accounts. There's a lot of easy ways to get through this. And, there's instances where it's difficult to figure out how you're going to be able to get through this. But all in all, you want to sit down and you want to work out your situation before you walk through the door, before you get out there, because once you do that, then the tables can easily turn. The parties could easily become distant with each other. Conflicts can arise. And I've seen situations where parties remain apart for a very, very long time, for months or years or whatever. They separated from each other. And because of the separation, the asset remain there and one spouse keep maintaining the assets. And then years down the line, the spouse who decided to leave the home returns and asks for their interest in whatever is there. And at that point, it would be difficult because then there's the question of what was the value of the asset at the time the spouse left the home, and whether or not there was any appreciation in the value of the asset on the portion that the spouse who left the home would have been entitled to. And worse yet, if you get the wrong attorney to represent you on that type of situation, it can happen where you end up having to relinquish your rights to your own assets to somebody who doesn't deserve it, who's not deserving of inheriting or receiving anything that you spend the rest of your 20 years maintaining the asset while that person went off into the sunshine to live their life. So, the best option, as I said, always is to make sure you stick to taking care of your business before you agree that, okay, it's over, we're separating, we're going to live our own lives. You live here and pay your rent here. I live here and pay my rent here. You don't do that. You always ensure first that you settle your conflict, then you move on with your life. That's always the best option when it comes to this type of divorces, separation, no fault divorce. Now, I want to get back to what I say in the beginning, that the law does not concern itself with what your spouse did if you need to get a no fault divorce. Now, even though these states have no fault divorces, there's still the issue where people would want to get a divorce based on adultery, based on cruelty, based on abandonment. People sometimes like to be adventurous and they just don't want to just walk away without giving a fight. A lot of people get hurt in the process of being married. Don't get me wrong. There are some people who get through marriage very lovingly and there are no conflicts, there's no issue, and they're going to remain together for the rest of their lives. But there are instances where this is almost never the case because the divorce rate is much higher than the rate of people who actually end up staying together for the rest of their lives. And I think one of the things that happen is there's a lot of mismatches going on in the whole cycle, in the whole entire circle of things. And because of this error in mismatching, or people choosing the wrong person, or sometimes people just get tired and they don't want to put the work in, they don't want to do whatever it takes to maintain that relationship. That's another situation. And because people don't want to put the effort in to maintain it, these are the result is you end up in divorce. Or a lot of times people change over time. There's instances where both parties were working at the time of the marriage, and then at some point during the marriage, one of the parties becomes sick, lost their job, and now they're unable to put an income in the home. They're unable to do anything to contribute towards the home. And then the spouse who is now working becomes frustrated because they feel like, okay, they're the caretaker, they're the breadwinner, they're doing everything while they have to care for the other spouse. And that kind of brings a conflict into the relationship. And ultimately, a breakdown occurs in the relationship or in the marriage. And once that happens, oftentimes you find that one of the spouse wants to be divorced. And if that happened, unfortunately, somebody has got to file for the divorce. And sometimes people want to file and say, okay, the person deserted me, so I would like to get a divorce based on the grounds of desertion. But I almost always advise my clients, just go for the no fault. The best thing you can do when you're leaving a marriage is to walk away in peace. You do not want to put yourself through a whole lot of stress fighting over nothing, because the bottom line is, at the end, whether it's be on the ground of desertion, whether you spend thousands of dollars to litigate a divorce, asking for your divorce on the ground of desertion, cruelty, abandonment, adultery, whatever ground you choose, the bottom line is you will get divorced. Okay, so if you already know that the bottom line is the divorce is going to end up happening one way or the other, I think the easiest thing to do is to try to minimize your expenses, minimize your losses. I do understand that there's cases where these things cannot happen. You just can't minimize your losses. You can't minimize the damages, because ultimately the spouse wants to fight. One party wants to fight, one party wants to settle. And I have cases where this is happening right now. One party wants to settle, one party wants to fight. I have a situation where the husband is like, I would like to get my divorce. And the wife is like, okay, you can get your divorce, but I need half of every single thing that you own. And he's like, I don't need anything that you have, though. So won't you just give me the divorce and let me go? And you can keep what you have and I keep what I have. But the wife is insisting. And one of the things she used to put before the judge is that he had a child outside of the marriage. The judge, not knowing, nonetheless knowledgeable of what the laws is as it relates to no fault, the judge was of the opinion that the lady might be entitled to the husband's asset because of bad conduct. Now, guys, take this in. You do not get punished in a no-fault state for bad conduct, okay? Now, I've known a situation where the wife stepped out of the marriage, had a child with another person. The husband tried to tell the court, which he would have prevailed, but it would have taken a lot. He would have had to appeal the judge's decision. So a lot of times things could be win on an appeal, but do you have the money to spend to appeal, to keep fighting on something that the law just oppresses you sometimes and give you a hard time? The wife already was holding herself out with another man, as the man being her husband. And in cases like that, the law says you're not entitled to spousal support. If you're in a marital or a relationship akin to a marriage, right, you're not entitled to support from your spouse. But for some reason, the judge in that case refused to even entertain the husband when he told the court that this lady had already moved on. I do not want to support this woman. The judge refused to listen to the husband. And like I said, guys, the husband could have appealed that judge, and that judge would have been wrong, because the laws itself says if your spouse leave the marital home and they're living with somebody else and they're holding themselves out with that person as husband and wives, and they're telling people like, hey, this is my husband, the person is telling the person this is my wife, then in that case you don't have to support that person. The spousal support only comes into play where you're leaving the person or the person is leaving you, and they're unable to self-support themselves, and they're not in a marital relationship or a relationship akin to a marriage, meaning they're not living home with somebody who could easily be called their house, their wife or their husband, and the person is not contributing to the person financially. So in that case, that spouse would be entitled from you for spousal support if they can establish, like, I'm not in a relationship, I can't support myself, I need spousal support. So whether or not that person is in a relationship, it affects the outcome of spousal support. If the relationship is just one that, it's just they're dating the person versus they're happily involved in something that looks like a marriage, then, those are things that the court will take into account. The court will factor that into. Other than that, limited circumstances where bad behavior is taken into account for the purposes of spousal support, it's really never taken into account. The courts doesn't care. One time I had a situation where the husband had children outside, him and the wife had separated. I pleaded the fact that he had children on his net worth statement, and the attorney for the other side, who did not understand that it didn't matter. He was trying to say, oh, adultery is still a crime in the state of New York. It's still a crime in the state of New York, but it's not prosecuted. And if people keep up with the laws in the state of New York, you would know that the governor, they're working towards appealing that law to remove that situation where adultery could be a crime or somebody could be prosecuted for committing adultery. All right, guys. So this is most of the things I think you need to know when it comes to a no-fault divorce in the state of New York, or any state that deals with no fault. No fault means the court doesn't concern itself, wouldn't care if the spouse is being unfaithful to you, or whether or not the spouse has moved on, has gotten a child with the other party. It's not relevant. Not relevant. So if you're sitting and you're thinking about getting this divorce, give me a call today at 718-877-3100. Although the law doesn't concern itself with behavior, bad behavior in a divorce, you should concern yourself that if your spouse is engaging in bad behavior, bad conduct, if your spouse is abusive to you, get out to the relationship and give me a call. If your spouse has abandoned you by constructively mistreating you in the home, and a lot of times this is something that could occur. A lot of times spouse could be mistreating a spouse in the home. They don't have time for them. They don't speak to them. They don't respect that person. And they're there. They're giving you all the signs that they don't want to be there, but they're still there. So if you see that is happening in your home, that's called constructive desertion. They don't want to tell you that they want to go, but they will show you that they want to go. And if you're seeing those signs, just make sure you pick the phone up and give me a call rather than remaining in a situation that will get you nowhere. Again, guys, this has been today's edition of The Law and You. It was my pleasure discussing the no-fault divorces in the state of New York with you guys. And I hope some of you have gained some information from this. I hope it was insightful. And if you need further assistance, like I said, the number is there on my screen. You can give me a call at any time, Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Our office is open. Walking are welcome, but we do not do consultation on walk-in, but you can walk into the office for general information. And if you need consultation, we usually schedule a 15 minutes free consultation to you. Anything over the 15 minutes, we charge a consultation fee, but consultation is free for the first 15 minutes. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope I'll see you again next Saturday at 4 o'clock. So see you again Saturday. Thank you for joining today's edition of The Law and You.